If you feel like the music industry is just way too confusing, you're not alone. Even myself, someone who coaches artists, helps them to understand the music industry, even helps promote their music, every once in a while, I still get tripped up by some nonsense that makes zero sense. There are so many things in the music industry that need reform and updating and change. For example, how nice would it be to have all of your royalties collected in one nice central location, one login where you can see everything, not BMI and Sound Exchange and then your distributor. And is that too much to ask for? My story today is just one small example of how unorganized the music industry is, and it's always us, the little guy, that gets inconvenienced while everyone else seems to be getting richer. Today's story is about my experience just trying to get my wife's album out onto Apple Music and Spotify and every other major streaming service. What she did and what we did is we recorded an awesome Gershwin album, recorded on our 1918 Steinway piano. We worked really hard on it for months and months. She practiced the heck out of these pieces. We were ready to distribute it and get it out for everyone to hear, including everyone who enjoys her playing. So because she didn't write these pieces, they're George Gershwin's originals, I got my attorney involved, and I'm going to blur her name out because I didn't get permission to reveal her identity, but she's super smart here in Nashville. I just wanted to make sure that everything was properly licensed because I didn't want any hiccups as we distribute her album. And so as you can see, out of these 6 tracks, one was in the public domain, so we did not need to acquire a mechanical license. But for the other 5 tracks, we actually needed to pay for mechanical licenses to legally distribute this album. Now, there are many ways to do this. She recommended either going through Harry Fox Agency, which you've probably heard of before, or you can go through the distributor like DistroKid, who acts on your behalf to obtain those licenses from Harry Fox, and it's all wrapped into the distribution process. Many distributors are doing this now, and it's just a really convenient way to get a cover song license if you're releasing a song that you did not write. No big deal. We're going to license these tracks. We're going to get it distributed, and I actually wanted to use a new distributor because I love testing these things out. I was going to make some new content, and one of the distributors I wanted to test out was Lander because they are just so cool. They have different services and it's all built into this subscription. But I actually never got a chance to finish distributing this album with Lander, and you probably noticed that there are no Lander videos out on the channel because I hit a major snag in the distribution process. Once I had all of the tracks uploaded and titled, I went and set the album name and set the genre as classical. And if you've ever heard any Gershwin pieces like Rhapsody in Blue, you'll know that he is a mix of classical and jazz. And so I set the proper genre and subgenre for this release, and I uploaded the cover art and made sure that it was all to the correct specs. And it was right here at this stage of the distribution process where I noticed that Apple Music and iTunes were grayed out and eliminated as options for this release. And the reason is because Apple Music and iTunes won't release albums that have classical or jazz tracks. And I was scratching my head at this because just one release prior, my wife and I were able to distribute her Schumann album just fine. So we were able to distribute this album just fine on Spotify, and it also was successfully sent to Apple Music as well. Just look, it even displays classical as the genre on Apple Music. I was thinking, this just must be a Lander issue, and for some reason, Lander just doesn't have the ability to send classical tracks over to Apple Music and iTunes. So unfortunately, I couldn't finish distributing with Lander, even though I really wanted to try them out super bad. And so I had to turn to another distributor I wanted to check out, which was Sounddrop Distribution. But Sounddrop was actually a worse situation. Not only was I unable to distribute her album using Sounddrop, but I actually got some pretty serious errors on the final approval of the submission. Basically, in a nutshell, the Sounddrop Distribution web portal didn't like how I was formatting the tracks, and because I selected classical as a genre, it was expecting it to be like a symphony, and it was expecting a catalog number and a movement number, and this was all very automated, but But if you've ever listened to Gershwin and you know Gershwin at all, he doesn't really have that style of formatting in the names of his pieces. He's not a Bach or a Beethoven or Mozart, right? He's much more modern of a composer, and actually many of his pieces are songs with lyrics. However, if you are a music history buff, you will understand that Gershwin is categorized as a classical artist, but the computerized submission portal at Sounddrop just couldn't wrap its head around this. I'm not saying that Sounddrop is bad, but it just didn't work for me in this situation. I still desperately needed to get this album released. We worked so hard on it, and there is yet another distributor I wanted to try out in hopes that it would accept classical music and send it to Apple Music and Spotify, and the next distributor I wanted to try was Tunecore. You might know that Tunecore recently updated their pricing model. It's now a much more affordable subscription where you get unlimited releases instead of paying per release per year, and it got really expensive in the past. Now it's much more modernized and updated and friendly to independent artists like us. I was super excited to try out Tunecore and get my wife's album distributed. I signed up immediately for the subscription in hopes that they would accept classical music. But the story continues to take tragic twists and turns when I discovered that Tunecore also is unable to deliver albums under the classical genre to iTunes, because they say that they just don't have the interface to add the extra information that is required for classical albums, such as composers, movements, and tempo. Thankfully, Tunecore was able to issue a refund, which I'm super thankful for, but I'm still without distribution and I'm more frustrated than ever. So you probably already know that this story has a semi-happy ending. I had nowhere else to turn other than my tried and true trusty distributor, Awol Distribution. It was Awol that finally allowed me to distribute my wife's album to all major streaming services, including Apple Music and iTunes. And still to this day, I'm just so impressed with the quality of Awol Distribution. And it only makes sense because when we released her last classical album, we used Awol as well, and we were able to distribute to Spotify and Apple Music alike in the classical category without a hitch. But then everything just went wrong. And it's not Awol's fault. They had nothing to do with this decision. But if you look on Apple Music today, you'll see that even with Awol accepting classical music and distributing it successfully to Apple Music, our Gershwin album is still not displayed on any Apple products, even though it's proudly displayed on Spotify in the classical category right next to her last classical album. So why did Apple block the release of our album? This was the question we were all asking ourselves, and thankfully the wonderful team over at Awol was able to help us find the answer. Here's what Awol sent back. They said, "Hey Ryan, hope you're well. The release has been hidden by Apple due to the following. Content will be hidden using the reason curated artist when Apple Music has curated an artist page and decided there are sufficient instances of a song or catalog available. If delivering public domain content, send only a version created from the best available source." Remember that email from my lawyer that I showed you in the beginning of the video, where one of the tracks was in public domain and the rest we had to pay licenses for? Well, according to Awol, that one public domain track blocked the entire release because of some weird Apple Music rule where they decide if your song is good enough to be shown in the artist's catalog. Obviously, I feel like that there could have been better options instead of just blocking the whole release. For example, why not just gray out the one public domain track that isn't from the best available source? Or just block the whole release from Gershwin's catalog, but keep it on my wife's catalog because they're both credited on the release. Gershwin credited as the composer and my wife credited as the performer. Obviously, Apple has the right to decide however they want to run their service, and I'm not making this video to bash Apple Music. It's mostly just to educate you and to make you aware of some of these hiccups that maybe even you might experience. If you need help deciding which distributor is right for you, I'm going to leave a video right here and also in the description to help you make that important decision. So best of luck with your music, and I'll see you in a future video.